Welcome to my September 2022 webinar. This one's called CODA, which is the name of a movie, Delivering and Receiving a Message. In many of the webinars that I've done, I've used movies as themes, as a way of presenting certain ideas that I wanted to talk about. And I hit upon this one kind of by accident, in the sense that the movie had been recommended to me, and it was available on Apple TV. And so I had to do a little maneuvering to be able to watch it, just a little maneuvering. And then was really struck when I saw the movie. I watched it again, and I've actually watched it a third time now over the last just few weeks. And I'm going to explain as I go along here some of the things that I took away from watching that movie. I have to say I was really impressed, and I encourage everybody to watch it. Tonight, I want to talk about how we deliver and how we receive messages. In other words, it's about the choices of media that we use to communicate, and the choices of modalities, sensory modalities that we use. And then we're going to look at an even deeper sense of what we're conveying and how we go about doing that. And the reason I wanted to talk about this today is that the feeling I've gotten, and many have written about this and talked about it, the feeling I've gotten is that we've gone more and more to text messaging and other forms of cryptic communication, not encrypted communication, just cryptic, short, and we don't really convey all that much. And sometimes it's more likely that our message is either really misunderstood, or the richness of it, the fullness of it just doesn't come across. And I think that's a very serious problem. In reflecting on the topic, I was thinking about how long ago, before we had electronic media of any kind, we communicated mainly in writing. And that would be both journalism, but certainly, also personal writing, and people who could write well and write good letters, as it were highly regarded. And so the art of language and the art of writing out language was highly developed, though of course not everybody could do it, but at least it was a goal, and it was a well understood goal. When we communicate with people, I think we generally assume that the message we're sending is conveying what we mean to convey. And we generally assume that when we receive a message, that we're receiving it the way the person wanted to send it to us. That is, what they wanted to send to us, the feeling of the thing, the meaning of the thing, and the practical value of the thing, as well as the why they're doing it. And in this digital age, that's been reduced to emojis and other forms of conveying emotion, and just text. And the texts are often extremely cryptic. That is, we even use letter abbreviations for whole phrases, or just a short couple of things, like people will say the word please, PLZ. And, we know what the word is, but the space taken up is getting smaller and smaller. And the information being communicated, and the feelings, certainly the feelings that are being communicated, are getting smaller and smaller. So in this webinar, we're going to examine how we send information, how we receive and interpret it. And the movie CODA, I thought, did a really good job of bringing emphasis to this process. And it did it because CODA is an acronym for Children of Deaf Adults. I almost didn't say it right. Children of Deaf Adults, adults that cannot hear, but children who can. And in that movie, they explore, among many themes, which are very beautifully presented, really well done, the theme of how do two people communicate when one of them cannot hear, but uses sight and touch and so on and so forth. And there are many examples of that in the movie. And sometimes, and the point I'm trying to make here is that sometimes I think we're going to discover that we're more deaf or blind than we realize, that we're not hearing the message and we're not seeing the message and we're not using the full modality of hearing, the sound that we're putting out, and using the whole modality of sight. And when people sign, for instance, the way they make the signs and the facial expressions, the body language and everything help to convey what the quote speaker wants to convey. And even the language, and this is, I think, a beautiful point, deaf people using American Sign Language are not actually speaking English. I mean, they're using English words, but they also shorten the phrases and use words to represent concepts just as standard practice. And this is because you can't sign every single word that somebody was saying. Like if you were trying to sign what I was saying and add a clip where I'm speaking, you couldn't get that out in sign language. So sign language is a condensed language, but it's also an extremely personal and emotive language, because when a person signs, there's a understanding that they have, even if it isn't conscious right at the moment they're doing it, that they can't use their voice to convey feeling and why they're, that sense of why they're speaking to you, what they're trying to say. And so they use their body language, their facial expressions, and the gestures that they use with the signing. So if they speak softly, the hands and things are not flying around so much. If they're angry, it's quite dramatic. And both in the facial expressions, got to be angry here, and in the body language, maybe leaning forward, and the enormity and speed of the hand movements, the size of the hand movements that give you that sense of what they're trying to say. And deaf people are very tuned into the other modalities besides the sound because they can't hear the sounds, and most of them can't express the sounds. Some of them can do some talking, and and it's fine. I'm not deaf, and I don't pretend to be an expert in communicating as a deaf person, but the movie helps us understand that as people, particularly in our culture, there is a range, but our culture generally kind of limits the body movement and even to some degree the facial expressions. Now, culturally, there are some exceptions. I hope I don't get into trouble, but I often think of the Italians that I knew in Philadelphia, people of Italian descent, who were kind of famous for the way they use their hands and their faces and the tone and pitch and rate of speed of the pronunciation of their words to get a great deal of emotion across. So some cultures project more emotion, others kind of keep it in. And if you're in a culture or raised in a culture where you hold in your emotions, where you don't let them out, that you're very stoic in your appearance, not a lot of facial expression, etc., then there's a real art to being able to communicate feeling, but not make it offensive. And so it's a real art to being able to speak in a way that gives the other person both time to appreciate what you're saying and time to consider, what an appropriate response would be. Now, this isn't so much true in just ordinary conversation, but when you're trying to make a point about something and trying to communicate, there's a courtesy kind of a way of presenting information, presenting your point of view. So what we learned from CODA is that because deaf people are using other means, particularly visual means of expressing themselves, they're sending a rich message along with the words that they are signing to help you appreciate what they're trying to say and where they're coming from. And the words that any of us use convey information, but not so much feeling. The feeling comes in the sound. So we're always using our voices not only to pronounce words that hopefully people will understand, but also the feeling of what we're trying to communicate. Now, when we send text messages, as I said, we convey emotion by using exclamation marks, capital letters, boldface, emoticons, of course, and italics. But these only kind of suggest what we're feeling and what we're trying to convey to the people about what we're saying. To really share what we feel, we have to send that information either visually or through the quality of tone of the sounds and signs that we're using along with our words. And as I say, some people are very good at this, but in our society, and particularly with the movement towards more digital forms of communication, there's a gap, a bigger gap than there used to be. Now, there was always a gap between the meaning of what we were putting out and how it is received. And part of the reason for that is that each of us is attuned a little bit differently. And this was one of the things I kind of learned about myself and how we all communicate from watching this movie. In this movie, message is delivered by seeing people use sign language, particularly in 3 scenes that I'd like to describe for you. I should set the background just a little bit in the movie. There's a Ruby and her parents and her older brother. And the family are fishermen. And dad and the son, Ruby's brother, and Ruby go out on the sea each day and use nets and catch fish that they sell. And so their life is much of it is just at sea. And Ruby has to be there to translate for them in case there's a radio call or when they get to the dock to help negotiate prices and that sort of thing. And so even from a very young age, Ruby has had to be a professional adult in the communication business. And so she's very good at it, actually. And it's quite charming. And there's some very, very funny scenes in the movie. But anyway, let me describe these 3 scenes. In the first scene that I want to talk about, Ruby performs on stage with classmates, and they're doing a kind of a recital, and her parents are in the audience. But they can't, parents and brother are in the audience, but they can't hear. And so Ruby does what she's supposed to do. She's singing, and it's very lovely for us. And then the way the director conveys to us the parents' experience is it shows them in the audience, and after the first verse of the song, the sound fades out like that. You catch what happens suddenly. There's no sound. And so they're looking around and they're taking their cues from the reactions of other people about how the song is supposed to be received. Remember, they don't know what the words of the song are. They can't hear it. And they can't hear the melody, and they can't hear the volume and the rate of speech and so on. So they're just watching. They can see Ruby on stage, but she's not signing. She's just singing along with the rest of her class. And it's a very beautiful scene, but it's a very dramatic way that to show what the parents' experience is, to show us as an audience what it is to cut off one of the modalities of transmitting a communication. And it's very, very effective. And it's almost shocking, really, when the sound fades away. I mean, you know what's happening, right? And then you're there, and you see these pictures of the parents that are looking around, taking their cues from the others as to how to receive what's going on stage.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
My watch is listening to this presentation. In the second
Not sure I
scene,
understand.
Ruby auditions for a scholarship. And it's a private audition. That is, say there are 3 representatives of the school that she's hoping to get into, or college. She's a high school senior. And her parents sneak into the balcony, and so they aren't readily visible, but she can see them from the stage. And she sings Joni Mitchell's Both Sides Now, which is a great piece of poetry, a beautiful, beautiful song. And she sings the first verse. And then after the first verse, she both sings it and signs it. And I strongly encourage you to go look up on the internet Ruby singing this. Her name is Amelia Jones, is the actress. And if you put Amelia Jones singing Both Sides Now, you'll find YouTube videos. And I'll try to put some links in the email that I send out about it. And it's watching her sign, again, conveys to us hearing people how our gestures and expressions and body language communicate. So the parents now have words because they can read the signing, and they can see what she's doing and how she signs. And the signing is gorgeous. It's really beautifully done. And I know that Amelia Jones had to practice and practice and practice, and probably had a lot of directorial guidance to express herself, not just make the signs with her hands, but to make them express themselves. It turns out that one of the things I've learned is that everybody who signs has a personality, just as everybody who speaks conveys a sense of themselves through their voice. Do they have a low voice, a high voice, a rough voice, a smooth voice? And do they modulate pitch and everything else like that? So it's a really beautiful thing to watch her sign this, and to take away from it the sense that, oh, all these other modalities are very important, not just the sound. In the third scene, all of these scenes are just very touching to watch. The teacher asks her voice teacher, her music teacher, asks her why she sings. Good question. Why do you sing? And the context of that is, why do you sing when your family is deaf? Why is that a way of expressing yourself? For instance, you might be a painter or somebody who draws, rather than, a singer. And she pauses and tries to consider it. And then she answers by miming the feeling. And again, it's just an exquisitely beautiful thing to watch. She's not using words, not using American Sign Language. She's just showing what it feels like, that it comes from the gut and it rises up and it carries her away. And it's very, you can't miss it, right? And she's just gesturing, but no words, no words. So we learn a lot from watching CODA. We learn a lot. There's so much in communication that you realize when a modality of communication, a major portion of it, is missing. And then if you think about people you know and how they speak or write and what they try to convey in text messages or written letters of one form or another, even electronic ones, you get a sense of what rich, full communication is. Now, here's a thing I learned from doing this that I thought was just a revelation to me. And I don't know if it's ever dawned on you, but you might just think about this. Some people, when they speak or when they listen, attend more to the meaning of the words than they do to the feeling. Other people do the opposite, and most people are somewhere in the middle. And the opposite is that they attend to the feeling. They know what a person is trying to convey, but they don't pay a lot of attention to the details of what they're being told. I happen to be one of the latter, right? So I pick up on where people are at, as we say, but I often, after a conversation, can't remember what they told me. But I have a feeling. So to give you an example, some people may receive an expression like this. Joan, this is what you heard. Joan said she likes the gift. Whereas somebody else might say, Joan is happy. Trivial example, but an important one nevertheless. In the first one, she conveys information, but not a lot of feeling, but some feeling. And so the person receives the information. Oh, she liked the gift. We'll just take that at face value, not question whether she did or not. And then others will say, oh, Joan is happy, to themselves, right? They take that in. That's what they hear. That's what they take in from the speech. The former is literal, while the latter is emotive. Very important difference. These differences are really crucial in communication. Let me give you another example. Think about what you remember in the speeches given by either your class valedictorian or an invited speaker at one of your graduations. What did you take away? You might remember what literally was said, that is, the facts and points that the speaker was making, or you might remember the inspiration or humor of the speaker. I heard Jim Carrey give a graduation speech one time, and it was really funny. And that's all I remember, is that it was a really funny speech. I honestly don't remember what he said, what meaning he was trying to convey. And I'm sure that if I ask anybody else who has heard that talk, that graduation talk, they would, perhaps say much more about what he actually said, but I don't get that much. So the thing is, what do you get when you're introduced to somebody? Another example of this. When you're introduced to somebody, do you remember the social details or the nature of the person you met? Will you remember that they just moved into a new house, which is a fact, or that they are happy in their new house, which is an emotional state? So I hope these examples show you how it is that we send out information. Are we a person who speaks or hears things very literally, very factually, or do we get more of the emotion? Or are we somewhere in the middle, that we get a good bit of both? So that's the basic idea here. And this thing that individuals vary in their capacity to communicate and the modalities that they can utilize. Do they use their hands? Do they use their face? Do they use their body? And then do they use their voice in a way by modulating pitch, rate of speech, the tone, rough tone, smooth tone, to convey what it is that they wish to get across to you? And then can any of us tell whether or not the person who has heard us, that we're communicating with, that we're talking with, have they heard what we wanted to convey? Now, there's some very formal ways of checking in. You say something to somebody, and then, at least in theory, I can't imagine doing this myself, but I know people who probably do because they've been taught this, and they'll say, now, can you say back to me what you heard? And this is done more as a training exercise than than something done practically in a life. But there are people who will do that sometimes, particularly if it's a delicate conversation. Some people call it a crucial conversation. Um, and maybe you know that there's been a lot of miscommunication. And so you might say something like, now I want to say where I'm at on this point. And then you say it. And then you would say, now what did you hear me say? And that's a good exercise, actually, because then the person tries to say back to you. And when you say that back to them, it helps sink in, helps into you what it was that you heard and thought that they said. And then you can have a little back and forth. Oh, well, I didn't really mean that. What I meant was this. And so you might elaborate and what its significance is to those other people because they don't actually feel it. And that's, we say it's a handicap. What it means is they're able to handle the factual stuff. They're not handling the emotional stuff. A person who is communicating with has to understand that and has to work around that. Now, dealing with somebody who deals only with the facts and almost not at all with the emotion can be very easy if you can train yourself to speak facts. And there's a kind of joke about it where a person will say, "Can you give me a hug?" And the person who's on the spectrum says yes, and then doesn't do anything. And then to properly communicate with that person, the person might say back, or they'll rephrase their point and say, "I need a hug. Would you please hug me now?" And then the person on the spectrum can respond and say, "Yes, give them a hug." If they can, they may not be able to, but if they can, they would do that. And so by making very specific requests, they can communicate effectively. And you're in the realm of facts. You're in the realm of concrete information and not in the realm of feeling. And one of the things about being with an autistic person, I'm watching another movie. It's from Korea, but it's on Netflix, called Extraordinary Attorney Woo, W-O. And she's pretty far out on the spectrum. And so at one point she has a conversation with her father where he tries to convey to her what it's like to live with her. And basically it comes down to the word alone. He feels like he's alone with her. And part of that is he's missing the communication between them. She doesn't do it the way other people do it. She does it by being present with him in the sense of doing the dishes or putting the food out on the table or whatever. He actually cooks the meals because that's what he does. He runs a restaurant. That's another very good series. They're putting out episodes once a week, although I got the feeling from the last one that may have been it for a while. But anyway, it's very, very well done. And so I'm just using that as yet another example of how the person who is putting out and receiving information can be very limited in the modalities that they can deal with. And if you're aware of it, you can work with it if you want to, if you're willing. But he had been working with it, all of her life. And he said it makes you feel alone. And then that makes her question a relationship that she's beginning to get involved in. And she finally has a conversation with the young man, and who's also an attorney. And in that conversation, he shows her how he can feel that he is with her when they're talking about things that are seemingly impersonal, yet very personal to her. But she doesn't convey any feeling about it, really. She just kind of goes on about it. It's whales, by the way, big sea mammals, whales. and she knows all about them. She knows everything about them. And if you're an ordinary person and you're listening to her, you go, okay, that got boring after 5 minutes or less. And but if you're in the mode where you can appreciate their enthusiasm for the subject, and that's what you're receiving, is not the information in the words that they're saying, but the recognition that this is important to them. They feel passionately about this, even if it comes out completely flat in the way there's no modulation in the voice. And so that's just another beautiful example of how each of us is unique in this way. We're each unique, and we may hook up with somebody. That's a bad phrase. We may develop a relationship with somebody based on something, some mutual interest or something, and then gradually discover that we're really not communicating on other things. You know, we can talk about music, or we can talk about politics or whatever. But we're really not communicating on other things because we're speaking in two different ways. I was going to say two different languages. It might literally be true, but it's more that we're just not communicating in ways that the other person can receive, and we're not conscious of it. And so I hope after all of this discussion, particularly if you're having some difficulty, and we're going to take that up now in the group clearing session. But if you're having some difficulty with somebody, think about how you communicate and how it is being received. And if necessary, check in with people. You know, did you, I'm trying to say this, did you understand that? Or what did you understand from that? And you have to say it very gently, otherwise you make people uptight. But, you want to check in and see, will they do that? Okay, I'm going to end that here, and then we will go into our group clearing session where we're going to dive into a communication issue for each of us together.